In one of the earlier lessons, we have discussed how we can create a CI/CD pipeline using Buddy, PubNub, and AWS Lambda functions. And in this lesson, we'll look at a simpler way of doing this with less moving parts, and that's always a good thing, because the simpler your deployment pipeline is, the easier will it be to maintain and manage it. Firstly, to make our lives easier, I'll move the source code of JavaScript from Zero to Hero Learning Portal from AWS Code Commit to a private GitHub repository. You may wonder why. Because Buddy integrates much better with GitHub than AWS Code Commit, so I went ahead and copied all my source code from AWS Code Commit to GitHub. Let me also show you the current AWS architecture that we have. We have a security-hardened jump host that is not directly connected to the internet, where we can first SSH into it, and then we can SSH into each and every single one of these EC2 web servers in this cluster. And these servers are fronted by an application load balancer, as you see here. And actually, that's all we need to know about the application infrastructure at a high level at the moment, I think, for the sake of this lesson at least. So let us shell into the jump host and look around a bit. Inside the jump host at the home directory of the user, we have a deploy nightly shell script, which uses pssh or parallel SSH to run a set of commands in parallel in our server cluster. pssh is a Linux utility that you can use to execute remote shell commands in parallel on a cluster of servers. So unlike Puppet or SaltStack or Chef or Ansible, pssh is not a full-fledged deployment tool, but for our use case it will be sufficient for us. You can learn more about how to use pssh by executing this man pssh manual command. And our deployment script takes this pssh hosts as an argument, and this pssh-hosts is actually a plain text file that we maintain a list of hosts that we would like to execute the deployment commands on. And this pssh-deploy-nightly command is just a series of commands to pull the recent code, build our new application, and then restart the Node.js process when the new application is built. Nothing fancy actually, it's a good old boring deployment pipeline script. Now to remotely trigger that script, we'll go to Buddy and use a Buddy pipeline, and I have created a Buddy pipeline already, so I'll just walk you through it. In this pipeline, I have 3 actions configured to be executed back to back, so whenever there is a new merge to this nightly branch, I will first run the tests on the project, and if the tests pass, I will execute the deploy-nightly sh, and if the remote execution and the remote deployment is successful, then it will mean that we have deployed the recent codebase to all of the edge nodes that we have. And if the execution is successful and the pssh remote deployment is successful, we send a notification to our deployment Slack channel, which finalizes this pipeline. The SSH configuration of the pipeline is pretty straightforward. We provide the IP of the edge node that we want to connect to. We provide the username and the user's private SSH key. And for Slack notifications, I just select a Slack workspace and a channel in that workspace to send the messages to, and that would be everything I need for configuring Slack. And for the interested, Buddy has integrations to anything that you can imagine actually. So feel free to tap this button and take a look at all the integrations that Buddy provides for you. But for our needs for now, this simple pipeline is good enough. So let's try this flow for real, shall we? I'll make an actual change in the UI locally. Let's say I want to prefix these titles with numbers as well, just like the sections that you see here. And then after I do my code change, I will build the code locally and run it locally to verify that my changes work, and I can see the titles prefixed with numbers locally. And then after verifying my changes locally, I'll publish my changes to the remote origins nightly branch. And this push will trigger this Buddy pipeline that we configured, and the Buddy pipeline will first run the tests, and after the tests pass, it will eventually run the deployer. But before even getting to this stage, I need to check out the code that we moved to GitHub to this cluster of Node.js web servers first. And I don't want to do the checkout by shelling into each server one by one manually. So what I want to do is to run the git clone commands in parallel in all the clustered servers. And for that, I'll again use pssh as my proxy. So first, on the jump host, I'll create an SSH key pair to be used with GitHub by doing a ssh-keygen-t rsa-b4096-c my email address, and I'll save the key as GitHub_RSA. And for all the hosts that I can connect to from this jump host, I'll run these two commands to copy over the GitHub public key and private keys to all the EC2 instances that this bastion host or this jump host is connected to. Just as a warning though, you should be really careful at this stage, because if you overwrite something in the SSH folder of the host incorrectly, or even if the permissions on the files that you copy over are not set correctly, then you may lose access to your instances. But I know that this script works fine, and also I like living dangerously, so I'll just change the mode of it and make it executable by the current user, and then run the script. And when I shell into one of these edge nodes and look into the SSH folder, I can see that we have copied these files over successfully, and their owners and the file permissions look okay as well, so at least we haven't shot ourselves in the foot yet. Now I'll add our SSH public key to GitHub, so that the edge nodes can fetch the source code from GitHub as well, and then I'll create a ssh/config file to configure the key that we are going to use for GitHub SSH connections. So for github.com as my host, I'll be using this identity file and this user. And I guess we are mostly set up, but before cloning my codebase into 8 separate remote nodes, I want to test the process on the jump host first. So I'll clone this repository to this temp folder, say yes to accept the challenge and continue, and it looks like it clones the repository as expected. Then I'm going to edit this copy GitHub credentials sh file to also copy over this known_hosts file. Now let's update this pssh nightly clone command by doing a sudo vim pssh-nightly-clone- command. For that, I'll rename the existing nightly repository folder to take a backup of what we already have, and then I'll clone the repository to this opt0to-hero.js 0to-hero nightly folder. So when we run the remote clone command, I get success responses from all the parallel threads. So it looks like we cloned the repository successfully. So let's shell randomly into one of the edge nodes and see if we were indeed successful. And when I shell into one of those nodes and check the branch, I see that it's on the nightly branch, so that's good too. We were able to successfully clone our codebase. So when we later manually trigger the body pipeline again, it will execute all of these actions, and you can watch what's happening behind the scenes on this body terminal as well. And when I connect to one of the edge nodes and do a PM2 list, I see that the Node.js instances have been rebooted, which indicates that we have done a successful deployment to all of the nodes in our web cluster. And to verify that the changes are there, I can go to nightly0to-hero.js.com and see that all the titles here are prefixed with numbers now, which visually shows that our change has taken effect. To test this pipeline fully end-to-end again, I'll do another change in the code and merge it to nightly and follow through what happens in body. So when I commit my changes and do a git push origin nightly, body reruns this entire pipeline, which re-executes this deployment script, which will then fetch the recent code, build it, and then restarts all of the Node.js servers that we have in the cluster. And actually we can and we do see the changes because I just published a broken code apparently, and that's also where writing good test cases come in handy. But I'll deal with writing tests later. For now, I'm gonna just fix this code and push it to the nightly branch again. And once the body pipeline runs again and I refresh the learning dashboard, I see the changes taking place immediately. So whenever I make a code change and push it, body will run the tests, and once the tests pass, the changes will be immediately reflected to the production web application, which is admittedly a bit frightening, but like I said, I like living dangerously.